Crabs of the Draft Network here for another TDN 100 update. Our scouting staff has had their eyes peeled across the country for all of the best prospects in college football eligible for the 2022 NFL Draft, and we are going to give you all of our latest observations here on the show with an updated top 100, which you can see right below on the ticker. So keep your eyes there as we are presenting a lot of these players to you. I am joined right now by Joe Marino, Dre Harris, Keith Sanchez. Brentley Weissman's going to be on with us in just a few minutes, which we're obviously stoked to have him in for the party as well as each and every one of you tuning in and watching. So with that in mind, let's start with some housekeeping items and changes to the TDN 100 this time around versus last time around. We do have a number of players who have dropped out of these rankings, including Alabama tight end Jaleel Billingsley, who we were very high on in August, but we just have not seen. And some of this thanks to the emergence of another member of the TDN 100, Jamison Williams, in this Alabama offense. Haven't seen him take that next step forward that maybe we were anticipating. Josh Wiley, tight end from Cincinnati. It's a very good tight end class. He was 94th last time. He's dropped out this time. Oklahoma running back Eric Gray, who again was another guy we were very high on in August. Haven't seen him take hold of that backfield role. Instead, that's Kennedy Brooks, and as a result, that production's not there, so he's falling out as well. Coastal Carolina defender Jeffrey Gunter, who is a very good presence on the edge. He's been ranked somewhere in the back quarter of the rankings for each of the first two times through, but he's fallen out this time amid a very busy and crowded edge class, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. So Ohio State corner Sevyn Banks, Minnesota defensive end Boye Mafe, LSU linebacker Mike Jones Jr., Nevada wide receiver Romeo Doubs, and Boston College offensive lineman Alec Lindstrom. So, Joe, I'll start with you. We hear these names that have fallen out this time. Anybody that jumps off to you as somebody you're surprised by or not surprised by to no longer see make this list?
Well, I guess there's a name that disappoints me that he had to fall out, and that's Mike Jones from LSU. I was really excited about him getting over to LSU, and he was a good player for Clemson the last couple of seasons. Didn't necessarily have a major role for the Tigers defense or the Clemson Tigers defense, but you saw a lot of the flashes, and you saw a guy that was really good in space and terrific in coverage. And so I was excited to see that over at LSU, kind of leveling up. I know that Clemson's a Power 5 team, but it ain't LSU. Let's be honest about it. And so I wanted to see him in that defense. We saw Jabril Cox come over from North Dakota State and play really well for LSU, and I thought he was going to fall in line. And it's not that Mike Jones hasn't played bad, but he certainly had some injury issues that have limited him this year. But what he hasn't really done is done anything to really solidify his status or belonging in the top 100 like I hope that he would. And so I don't think the book is written on Mike Jones, but right now, given a smaller resume than we were hoping for at LSU, I don't think he can be in there. But I do like some linebackers that can run and cover. He can definitely do that. We just need to see more of it on the field.
Hey, I agree with you. I'm sorry, Kyle. I was going to go off of that, Joe. I agree with you. I think it was definitely disappointing, like you said, seeing LSU, what they did with Jabril Cox the year before, him going in a third, fourth round area, him making some big time plays, and just to see Mike Jones. And I think what I've noticed from watching the film, that Mike Jones is playing more in the box. When he was at Clemson, he played more of that nickel position, and he made a lot of his plays in space. And I think that now that he's transitioned to being into the box, he's kind of struggling a little bit. So I think what would be exciting to see moving forward, if he does declare for the draft, is if the draft scouts, if they look at the Clemson film and look what he can be on third downs and in nickel situations, or do they look at the LSU film and, kind of X him out because of the ability that he can't play in the box. So I think it'd be interesting moving forward for his draft prospect for sure.
So what I want to do here, since we're talking linebackers, is I want to talk about somebody who just barely missed. And Dre, I want to give you a chance to talk about this guy. You did his write-up last month, and it's a guy who I saw, and he made my cut. So you guys can't be mad at me if you're Chad Muma truthers out there. He made my ballot for top 100. But Dre, we're talking about linebackers here, Mike Jones Jr. and him kind of falling out a little bit. Let's talk about Chad Muma, the player, as somebody who can hit a lot of these boxes that these guys are talking about with Mike Jones Jr.
Chad has skill set that easily transfers to the National Football League. I do think he's a guy who has to probably play in the even front scheme, but he does think a few things that you love and certainly get you excited about. He has very good tackling efficiency. He rarely misses tackles. He shows very good instincts, excellent instincts against the pass. I think at one particular time, early this season, he was leading the country, in picks. So he's a 3-down guy, a guy who, with the game being played in sub, he's a guy that can stay on the field and play on all 3 downs. So he's someone who's been extremely productive, and his skill set easily translates to the National Football League.
So he's impact player. He doesn't miss tackles. He plays special teams too. So, even if he's weaned into a role early on as a starting player, who knew? Wyoming, nice little pipeline for linebackers over the last couple of years. So when we look at the rest of the guys who did make TDN the 100, though, these guys dropped out, which means guys had to go back into those spots. So I want to introduce the guys who jumped back up into the ranks here. Michigan defensive end David Ojabo is the #1 ranked player who was unranked in the previous edition. He checks in at number 30, a top 32 ranking for him. Jamison Williams, wide receiver, Alabama, coming in at 38. Georgia defensive end Trayvon Walker at 47. Notre Dame defensive end Isaiah Foskey at 67. Alabama defensive lineman Fidari Mathis at 70. Houston defensive end Logan Hall at 74. Central Michigan offensive tackle Bernard Raymond at 75. Tennessee corner Alante Taylor at 90. Virginia Tech offensive lineman Lasitis Smith at 95. And LSU offensive lineman Ed Ingram at 99. Joe, I see a lot of brand players on the back half of this here for you. So which one of these guys are you not the highest on, but the most excited about?
Yeah, the player that I'm really excited about is Fidarian Mathis. We've talked a lot about this interior defensive line class, and we needed some players to emerge. And Mathis has been a pretty steady presence for Alabama, but I think he's really put it all together this year as both a run defender and a pass rusher. He's a guy that I've been extremely impressed with, and a guy that we needed to emerge. And so we've seen him put it all together. He's a polished technician. He's a balanced player. You're seeing some explosiveness. He's stout against the run. And so for a defensive tackle class that needed some guys to emerge, he has definitely done that. And at least on my ballot, I ranked him pretty highly.
Dre, talk to us about Trayvon Walker. This was a guy who was unranked coming into this season for us in the TDN 100, but has really kind of commanded everybody's eyes amidst all the success the Georgia defense has had. And I know we make sure we just got the write-up in for him this past week to make sure that he was well represented here and everybody could see our thoughts. So when you really dug into Trayvon Walker, what did you see that excited you about his play?
He has a skill set too that will easily translate to the National Football League. He's someone who has size and length. He's someone who's played on the edge of that that front is extremely talented. Probably most of the people on the Georgia defense will have the chance to play on Sundays. But what he's done is he's been really impactful. He's been very influential as a pass rusher. He consistently gets pressure. He doesn't always finish with sacks, but he has size and length. He's someone who's 6'5", 275. He's someone that can rush and drop from an up or down position. So he certainly has a few things that you get excited about in terms of projecting him to the next level.
Keith, wanted to ask you real quick about Ed Ingram as well. Obviously, there's a little bit of familiarity there with your time with the program. And when we think about offensive linemen and kind of the scarcity of good ones across the league, and we've had a couple of good classes in the past couple of years that have kind of helped invigorate some good youth to the NFL teams. And positional value wise, Ed Ingram is probably going to be available in this range where we have him ranked as a player. So any team that's interested in upgrading at the interior offensive line, specifically at the guard spot, what's the best qualities that they're going to look at and evaluate with Ed Ingram?
I think we'll go two-pronged with this answer. The first thing I think that would stand out is his size. I think he's every bit of 6'5", 320, 330 pounds, and you'll notice that he moves really well for that size too. So I think that when you talk about positional versatility on the offensive line, he can play guard and he can play some tackle because he has the length, the size, and athleticism to do it. Then I think the second thing that stands out for you was the fact that he loves football, right? He's a senior. He came back. He was draft eligible last year, probably in the same exact position, second, third round guy, but he decided to come back because LSU had a bad season last year and he wanted to come back, redeem himself. Obviously, it didn't work this year as far as the whole football team, but I think when you talk about a love for the game, I think that that's something that stands out for you, and I think that's what you'll get in Ed Ingram, a tough, gritty football player that loves football.
And I can't let this segment go without shouting out Isaiah Foskey as well, who has been up until the 2021 season a little bit more of a rotational guy for Notre Dame, and he stepped into a full-time role this year. But I always love seeing guys that don't necessarily have a lot of starting experience in their youth and how they still find a way to make impact plays. When Foskey was on the field prior to 2021, splash plays to be found, including on special teams. He blocked a punt in 2019 and in 2020. So that gives you a little bit of an idea for an athlete who is a redshirt sophomore, 6'5", 260 pounds, and really moves well, that he's got a nose for the football that's really difficult to ignore. And he converts his speed to power very well. He's very explosive in short spaces. His redirectional quickness and lateral agility on the edge is a huge plus for him. And you see that in some of the ways that they use him, where he's kind of a chess piece at times. They're willing to stack him on the second level and move him around and let his athleticism really shine in a lot of places. He's still continuing to better and hone his pass rush palette and his consistency and attacking half a man and setting up his moves. But from a traits perspective, Foskey this year, I think has done a great job in maximizing the experiences of years past and parlaying them into strong play this year amid a very, very crowded edge class, which is what we are going to be talking about next. So let's go ahead. Let's bring Brentley Wiseman into the fray. Let's switch gears and let's talk about just how loaded this damn edge class really is. Joined by Brentley Wiseman for this next segment. It's good to have you and know that you're going to ride with us for the rest of this show, Brentley. So welcome to the party. First and foremost, we're going to talk a little bit of edge defenders, because when we stacked this board with these rankings for this latest update, we had 20 edge defenders represented in the top 100, including several of which are new faces that were not represented in previous iterations. And then we had 4 more guys that got votes that didn't make the cutoff. So you're talking nearly a quarter of TDN 100 this time around is edge defenders, including our number 1 overall player. A big change with Kayvon Thibodeau coming in at number 1. And Brentley, you are the resident Oregon Duck here on this meeting. So I want to give you the chance to talk about what Kayvon has done, particularly since he's come back from the early season injury that has just left no doubt. You know, this was a unanimous vote for number 1 with our group.
Yeah, you know, I mean, watching Kayvon Thibodeau since he's returned back from injury has been nothing short of sensational. You know, that he's getting all the attention from the offense. You're seeing tight ends chip him. You're seeing, you know, leaving a fullback in there to chip him on an out route. They're doing everything they can to stop him from being disruptive. Yet week after week, play after play, he's impacting the game. You know, he may not get the sack, but he's certainly getting pressure. You know, he's forcing quarterbacks off his spot, just being really disruptive. You know, heading into the year, we know what kind of athlete he is. Very explosive, outstanding burst, really good power at the point of attack, has length, can bend. So we knew all that. We just wanted to see him use those traits and skill sets, you know, at a consistent level, play in, play out. And I think he's doing that over the past month of the season. And to me, Kyle, what has really stood out is when Oregon, the defense needs a play and they need a stop on a 3rd down or 4th and 1 or a gotta have a moment, he's the one getting home. So, you know, in the NFL, we like to say your big money players need to make big plays at the big time. he's doing it. And so to me, he's answered all the questions that anyone could have possibly had entering the year. He's really living up to his preseason potential and his hype. So I think him being the number one player on our TDN 100 is definitely justified.
We look at the rest of the top of this grouping, and Aiden Hutchinson, a consensus top 5 player for everybody on this staff. George Karlaftis from Purdue, a consensus top 12 player for everybody else. It gets interesting after that. We have one player in particular who is a new arrival, and that's David Ojabo, the defensive end hybrid edge linebacker type from the University of Michigan. And Joe, I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about Ojabo because he's one of these really long, explosive, dynamic types. And I see how you have him stacked versus a couple of other edge defenders that are kind of built similarly in Myjai Sanders and Drake Jackson. And you've got Ojabo comfortably a tier above. So talk to me about, I know what I've seen from him, but I want to hear you talk about it a little bit, especially because those are some other names that have been associated with the top of this edge group for quite a while.
I got my first in-depth exposure to Michigan this year during the Michigan State game, which was a great opportunity to see David Ojabo play. And I'm like, who's this guy? Who is this guy that is wrecking this football game? And he's impressive, and he really pops off the tape. And, he's 6'5", 250 pounds, so he's a little bit lean, but it's the length that he plays with and how he uses his hands and how he clears contact and takes really good rush angles. And I feel like the entire package there is much better than Sanders or Jackson, especially as a run defender. Sanders is a really good run defender as well, but I don't know that he has the same type of length and explosiveness that you see from Ojabo and the consistency clearing blocks. I think that's really where Ojabo has an advantage. And so since that Michigan State game, I thought he played well against Indiana, but then against Penn State again, most recently, he was unblockable again. And so these recent exposures have really piqued my interest in him. I've watched more since, and I really like this player. Obviously, he plays opposite of Aiden Hutchinson, but that shouldn't be something that we use as a disqualifier for what this guy's doing. He's beating blocks on his own. He's got his own great traits, and he's a guy that's really seizing this opportunity to make plays late in the season, and I think he's very warranted in terms of his climb up the board.
So Dre, we mentioned the name Drake Jackson a couple of times, and he's somebody we've kind of collectively cooled on a little bit. I think some of the concerns that you had ahead of the season have been realized, at least to some degree, as far as consistency in finishing plays. But would love to hear from your insight as somebody who is out west. You see the Pac-12 on a weekly basis. How has Drake been able to change the narrative, if at all, surrounding his own game?
I think I'll start with the things that you like to see in Drake. I mean, Drake certainly is a very good athlete in terms of his fluidity, very good agility and quickness. I think the word often associated with him is potential, right? Because there's the potential to be so much more than he has been because he's such a great athlete. But there are some concerns. I mean, he hasn't been as consistent as you like. I don't think that he's played the run as well as he can, and he's a frail guy. I mean, he's extremely lean, and the National Football League is a big man's game, so his ability to hold up on the edge and the inconsistency in his play and not being able to consistently rise to the occasion is what has worried me about Drake Jackson.
Keith, wanted to ask you about the other name that's kind of up in this top range, and that's Myjai Sanders. And he's kind of stacked similarly to Ojabo and Drake Jackson for you, all three of these guys in that 30 to 40 range. So when you think about Myjai Sanders, this is a guy who's long, he's 250, but he doesn't look it. You've been around a program that's had a lot of success putting out edge rushers in the LSU program over the last couple of years. So kind of curious, from what Sanders presents as a player and as a profile, what have you seen that can lead you to buy into his success as a prospect at the next level?
Right. And I think the first thing you hit on, and I think that's the first thing that a lot of draft scouts and GMs will look at, and that's his frame. Like you said, he's 6'4", 6'5", 250 pounds. So those guys just don't grow on trees everywhere. And then when you combine that with the athleticism that he has, his quick initial first step, and then his production that he gets getting to the quarterback, I think it makes him a very intriguing prospect. I think the one thing that you have questions about is obviously the conference that they play in. But the thing is, with Majid, he shows up day in and day out, and all you could do is play the competition that they put in front of you. So I think he's a very intriguing prospect. I think he's scheme versatile to where he can possibly be a 4-3 defensive end or a 3-4 outside linebacker. So I think in that 30 to 40 range, so you talk the back end of the first round, early second round, you can get really good value by possibly drafting a premier edge rusher at that pick.
Want to round out this group and just recognize some of these other names. Also landing in the top 50 here, just out of edge defenders. Georgia's Trayvon Walker at 47. Ohio State's Zach Harrison at 48. Joe, one of your pound the table guys, Jermaine Johnson, he's checking in at 60. And he's on a very, very steep ascension through these ranks. He was unranked in August. He was 78th in October, up to 60 now. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up chasing down Zach Harrison in these rankings and making the leap past him. Johnson coming off of a monstrous performance this past weekend, but that doesn't even get into names like Nick Bonito from Oklahoma, or Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame, Logan Hall from Houston, Kingsley Enagbari from South Carolina, Brenton Cox Jr. from Florida, Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State, transfer from Temple, Ali Gay, LSU, Nolan Smith, Georgia, Zachary Carter, Florida, Isaiah Thomas, Oklahoma, and Sam Williams from Mississippi. There's only 20 of them in the top 100. So if you guys need one, the good news is you're probably going to find one, if not two, no matter what your criteria are, what you're most interested in, what kind of style of defense you play, what system, what alignment. Pick your poison. It's going to be there for you. And we are going to be bringing Eric Galko, the director of the Shrine Bowl, into the fray to talk big picture, some of these top guys, and we're going to pick our poison with what we want to ask Eric about. So let's go ahead. Let's bring him into the fray here on the TDN 100 update. Joined now on the TDN 100 update show by a dear friend of the TDN family and also the Draft Dudes podcast, Mr. Eric Galko, the director of the Shrine Bowl. Eric, thanks for carving some time and talking a little ball with us here on the TDN 100 update for the month of November. How are things going in your build up to the event in January?
Things are good. It's maybe the best senior class that the NFL draft has seen in a long time. So I'm spoiled with players to talk about and players to invite to the Shrine Bowl.
Yeah, so when we look at our update for this iteration of the rankings, our top senior as things currently stand is Michigan defensive end Aiden Hutchinson, who's checking in at number 4 on our overall big board. Kind of curious from what you've seen of Aiden, anybody that he may remind you of that's come through the process in the past couple of years, or alternatively, what's been so different with him this year other than just being healthy versus last year that's really allowed him to kind of make these loud proclamations with his play on the field?
Yeah, I think he reminds, sometimes he can look like a Bosa out there as an edge rusher and make a play upfield. I think his hand strength and ability to dominate one-on-ones reminds of J.J. Watt. And I'm not original in those comparisons. I think people have made those comparisons. But I think for Hutchinson and why, and by the way, he's our top senior at any position in the entire draft. We have a grade above everybody else for Aiden Hutchinson with how he's played this year. I think what's been most impressive this year is how good he's been at so many different aspects of pass rusher. And I think he genuinely may be the only rusher in this class, and it's a loaded edge rusher class, that can genuinely fit at least one, if not two roles in every defense in the NFL. And that's what makes him a guy who's going to contend for maybe the first overall pick, maybe the top edge rusher overall in the draft. People weren't saying even a few months ago. But I think the fact that every defense is going to say, you know what, at the very least, if we get him, we're going to have a 10-year pass rusher who makes an impact for us. Maybe not a scheme fit for everybody, but winning in one-on-one, winning in the five technique role and the B gap, playing in space, winning on screens, all these things he's doing so well makes him, I think, a really special prospect. And we start talking about him as one of the better edge prospects the last few years.
And, keeping things on the defensive line, we look at our next top rated senior here at TDN on the update for the TDN 100, and it's Jordan Davis, defensive tackle from University of Georgia. And it seems as though great minds are thinking alike. So I got to ask, where do you stand on the value of his play, his 3-down value, how that can project to the next value, because I know we have our own opinions, but that's something that I'm always interested to hear what other people think outside of our own little process for Davis.
I think for Davis, I think I made this comparison with you guys in the Draft Dude podcast a while back. But if you look back and say, hey, who would you rather, Derwin James or Vita Vea? You'd probably even say Vita Vea, even though Derwin's been fantastic. I think we look at how impactful nose tackles are. I think if Jordan Davis, even if he's just a first and second down player for your team, he could be so impactful for what you can do with linebackers and stunts that just first, second down value makes him one of the best players in this draft process. Not to mention that I think he's shown the ability to, when he gets penetration, finish away from his frame with one hand through blockers as well. So I think he genuinely is one of the top 10 players in this draft class. I think he's going to go in the top 10 to 12 picks in this draft class, even if there's other players that emerge in the process, because of the fact that he can be so dominant when he needs to be on first and second down. And if he can even get you 4 or 5 sacks a year, be incredible. I think he's a genuine comparison, a little bit stylistically differently, but the impact he can make is a Vince Wilfork level impact in the next level.
And he checks in at number 9 for us on our ranking. So right there in that fringe. Next senior, number 11 on the TDN 100 is Ohio State wide receiver Chris Olave. He's obviously a part of a 3-headed trio of pass catchers that is just impossible to try to defend, coming off of them dropping a 60 burger on Purdue this past weekend. But when you think about Chris Olave, I know one of the questions that our scouting group has had a lot of questions about is profiling his type as a perimeter receiver versus a slot receiver, and his ability to win down the field versus potentially how he wins in traffic. So when you take into consideration the resume that Chris Olave has put together throughout the course of his time at Ohio State, again, kind of like Jordan Davis in 3-down value, I would love to hear from your perspective where you're at on Olave as an inside-outside receiver, and if he's somebody that's got to work vertically or if he's going to be able to have a more nuanced role at the NFL level.
I would say 6-7 years ago, if you told me the top 2 receivers, senior receivers in the draft were under 190 pounds, I would tell you it's a terrible receiver class. But then Devonta Smith just happened, and he's a player who's showing that, like, you know what, maybe we need to recalibrate, not just because of the hand rules that and pass interference calls that DBs have, but just how that size may not matter as much in today's NFL. And that's why Olave gets you excited. I don't think he is the same prospect coming out, and I had a huge grade on this player, but I think Olave reminds me a lot of how Keenan Allen won in college and can win in the NFL. And I think that's where Olave gets me excited, because I think his future is as a Z. I think he could play the slot, but I'm not worried about him being a full-time outside receiver. I think he could do that at a very high level, but the nuance he runs as a route runner, his ability to win on digs, deep comebacks, doesn't always show a lot of those routes sometimes at Ohio State in that offense, because they can put up points so easily and drive the ball down the field. But I think at the NFL level, he'll show that ability to be a second and third level route runner and have the nuance there to really be impressive. And again, I would say 5-6 years ago, me would have been really worried about his size, but if he can be at 185, 190, the way he plays, I think he'd be an impact. The question I think for me is, can he be a wide receiver 1 in your offense? And that's what the question the NFL teams kind of want to answer is, can he win consistently against bracketed coverage? Can you set plays up for him a lot? Or is he going to be a guy that if you have 2 other receivers around him that can get separation, then he'll really blossom? That's the only question I have with Olave, but overall, I think he's a really special route runner, a nuanced player, and will be an immediate impact for NFL team.
So I got one more for you, and then I know you want to talk a little bit of quarterbacks here. So we're going to make sure we sneak one in. So you've talked about the trends in 5 years ago versus now. And one of the really highly rated players that we have, he's checking in at number 15 on our board, is a linebacker, DEVIN LLOYD from Utah, who has been an absolute monster this year in all phases, making impact as a rusher and against the run and as a pass coverage player as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on somebody who can do all of the things that DEVIN LLOYD can, and doing them at 235, 240 pounds and having length at his disposal. You know, in today's NFL game, where so much of it is played in sub and it's about finding mismatches, creating mismatches, and a guy who can stay on the field, be a base linebacker, can play coverage, cover tight ends. You know, does he get a boost for that with his valuation in your mind relative to, we've seen guys like Isaiah Simmons kind of elevate these hybrid linebacker types, but Lloyd's a little bit more of a true linebacker. And I'm curious how you perceive that skill set in today's climate.
Well, I love DEVIN LLOYD. I think he's a fantastic prospect and a guy who's going to be an impact player. I think when you're asked by NFL teams, NFL teams have kind of told us out of both sides of their mouth, they both don't want to value linebackers, but certain ones they will value very highly. And I think what I look for in linebackers, similar to running backs, is my first snaps I'll watch of those players is on passing downs. We'll have the rusher and a coverage guy, right? For running backs, it's can you pass catch and you pass block? Then I'll watch your running snaps. I think for linebackers, it's the same for me. Watch Devin Lloyd only as a blitzer, only as an edge player, and then in coverage. I think he's so comfortable doing both of those things. I think it's the next level of awareness that he shows that makes him from an intriguing athletic linebacker to a guy that could be, will be a top 20 overall pick. You watch Demarion Overshown from Texas, a lot of the same skills, but not as put together, I think, as Devin Lloyd and what Lloyd can do. I think Lloyd's ability to get upfield, to still play against the draw and the screen game as a rusher, but still get impact and make a play on the quarterback. But the coverage and use of length, the anticipation in zone and transitioning off players on drag routes. Again, I think the NFL has said, hey, running backs and linebackers are not valuable in the top 20 overall picks unless you're special or unless you can really rush the passer or pass catch. And I think that's what Devin Lloyd has showed. He's not a Micah Parsons level pass rusher or an athlete. Micah Parsons is pretty rare, but I think the fact that Lloyd can win on all three downs and nickel packages and 4-3, working the goal line, I think he's really, really impressive. And again, I think you guys are dead on. He'll go in the top 20 picks. I'll be shocked if he doesn't.
So let's talk a little quarterbacks, because our group is going to be talking quarterbacks as soon as we get your thoughts here. So we've kind of surveyed this quarterback landscape for the better part of the season now. And you've got guys that are tools and you've got guys that have great production, and kind of curious from your perspective, who has separated themselves? Because a lot of places you go, our group has 4 different QB1s just amidst our own team with individual ballots. So who in your mind has made the most of the opportunities that they've received in 2021 to make a firm case going into the offseason circuit to claim QB1?
Well, I will tell you guys, I got a lot of teams bored, especially on quarterbacks. I've been curious myself. And I've also heard 4 QB1s across the NFL. And those are Matt Corral, Malik Willis, Sam Howell, and Kenny Pickett, every team. And the fascinating part of this quarterback class is it really is not just a scheme thing, but it's also coaches value players. Like, I think a lot more coaches value Kenny Pickett than other teams versus some teams, and GMs especially value the Malik Willis and the Matt Corral, maybe guys that perceived to have more upside. So you guys are dead on in the sense that 4 different quarterback ones based on the entire NFL. And I've heard the rationale for all 4 of those. I think as far as seniors go, and Matt Corral is the one quarterback who's underclassmen, him and Sam Howell, both underclassmen, both not all-star game eligible. I can make the case for both of those guys to be quarterback 1 as well. But I think the difference between Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett, I think both have emerged this year, but in very different ways. Malik has emerged in kind of a Josh Allen way when he was at Wyoming, where you look at the stat sheet, you look at the games he should win, and he's not dominating those games, and he makes a lot of decisions he definitely wants back, but you still see the talent that makes him a guy who I think undeniably can be a franchise quarterback, similar to what Josh Allen showed at Wyoming. And then you have Kenny Pickett, who really looks like Joe Burrow. I think I tweeted the other day about his production similarities to Joe Burrow are fascinating. And when you factor in that he's also doesn't have the same 3 first-round receivers that Joe Burrow had at LSU, you get even more excited about Kenny Pickett, but maybe the upside's limited there as well, too. So I think for NFL teams, those 2 have separated themselves among the top quarterbacks. But again, if I had to guess right now, I would say that Malik Willis is still the first quarterback taken in the draft, but it may really depend on how highly these teams value the quarterbacks and then which team has the first pick. But I think like most years, we're not going to see these quarterbacks go super late in the draft. We're going to have 2 or 3 go in the top 15, 20 picks.
Eric Galko of the Shrine Bowl. It's great catching up with you, man. Hope to have you on again soon and continue to talk shop in the build up to this year's Shrine Bowl event, which we are very, very excited for, but probably not as excited for it as you are.
Yeah, especially with our quarterbacks are going to be there. You guys will be excited too. So
we're going to talk a little bit more quarterbacks here on the TDN 100 update. We got the full gang with us: Dre Harris, Brentley Weisman, Joe Marino, Keith Sanchez, and Chrissy Freud, which we are very excited to have a little bit of lively quarterback debate, because as I teased when talking to Eric, there is no shortage of representation for QB1s. Let's talk consensus first. The way these things stacked: Matt Corral currently checking in 28th overall in the TDN 100, QB1 from the consensus rankings from our group, followed by Liberty's Malik Willis at 31, Cincinnati's Desmond Ridder at 35, UNC's Sam Howell at 39, Nevada's Carson Strong at 53, and Pittsburgh's Kenny Pickett at 55. And I want to start with Kenny Pickett because I know we got two on this call who have really loved what they've seen. I'm going to start with Keith. Chris, you lost this right because you flipped Kenny out of QB1 in your rankings this past week. So I got to start with Keith because he's got him QB1. So Keith, you watched a little bit of Kenny Pickett this past week. What really jumped out to you about Pickett, his style of play, and how you think that can translate?
Right. Well, I'm going to hold a flag for Kenny Pickett. The first thing that I realized in the pocket, he was very composed. You seen that he had great composure and he always made great decisions with the football. Another thing was the pro style offense that he played in. I seen him throw deep comebacks on the money. You see him throw quick outs. You see him throw quick slants. You see him all the way at the line. And like I said, he had really good composure in the pocket. The biggest thing for me when I watch quarterbacks, I always like to see the little nuances of the game, right? How do they feel? How do they get rattled? Do they shake back? Do they make a redeeming play? And I always seen Kenny Pickett seem to make the right play. So that's why I decided to put him as my number one quarterback. It's no knock to the rest of the guys. I just think that Kenny Pickett has elevated himself this year, and I think that he will make the transition into the NFL seamlessly.
So, Chrissy, you've seen as much of these quarterbacks as anybody. You do the weekly quarterback rankings. Kenny's been strong push. He peaked out at number one. He's still sitting as a top two quarterback for you. When you hear Keith describe Kenny Pickett as a player, what do you see that you agree with? Are there any dynamics that really you feel are special to his game that maybe Keith didn't touch on as well?
Yeah, I have a framed 8x10 picture of Kenny Pickett in my living room with the Carson Strong card in the middle of the frame as well, because that is how close these two quarterbacks are. And talk about a meteoric rise. This guy, I know that we don't like to do comparisons. The players don't always like the comparisons, but he reminds me so much of Joe Burrow with that sneaky fast mobility that Joe Burrow talked about himself. So he has, he's not Lamar Jackson, but he has the ability to move around the pocket, the ability to create plays with his legs. I think he's very accurate at all levels of the field, good on the deep ball. He mentioned the composure in the pocket. That's a very big deal. And the mentality. I've spent time talking to Joe Burrow. I've spent time talking to Kenny Pickett, and it's that same kind of very sure of myself, not arrogant, not necessarily humble mentality that I like to see from a quarterback that seems to be so common just within these quarterbacks that do well.
So if we look at the rest of this group, Joe, I do want to kick this to you, given the fact that about 3/4 of these guys are in your region, which must be nice to have a plethora of quarterbacks in your scouting region you're responsible for. So whether it's Desmond, you want to go to bat for Desmond Ridder, you got him at QB1. Why don't you go ahead? And I know you've been riding this train for a real long time now. So you still liking what you see from Cincinnati and Desmond Ridder?
Well, let's be honest. I think it's kind of hard to go to bat for any one of these guys. They've been up and down. I think Kenny Pickett's definitely played the best this year of all these quarterbacks, but when forecasting it to the NFL, I think it gets a lot more complicated. So right now, Desmond Ridder is my QB1, and what it really comes down to is trying to make this as simple as possible in a very complicated overall discussion. The best combination of size, arm talent, and running ability is probably Desmond Ridder of all of these players, and that's kind of what I'm clinging to. And the idea that if I get him in the building, I can really structure an offense that can challenge defenses in a lot of different ways. And so that's what I'm clinging to. I think obviously the Notre Dame game was a high point for him this past year. I think his passing efficiency has improved throughout his career and throughout this season. And so I just think there's a dual threat ability here with arm talent and size that makes him the most appealing in a class of quarterbacks where I don't feel like there's a lot of certainty. So he's just the guy right now that I believe in the most, but you ask me next week and I might have a different answer for you.
Well, go ahead, Keith.
I was about to say, I have to agree with you on that. I think that Desmond Ridder has the highest upside. He has the most tools of all the guys. Like you said, he has the size. He's really athletic. Like he'll probably run a 4.5 or a 4.6, and he's pretty accurate with the football. So I think that many NFL GMs and offensive coordinators, head coaches will see those tools going through the draft process and feel like, hey, I can take this guy and make him into something. And throughout the process, I've been trying to come up with a good comp for Desmond Ridder, and the best thing that I could come up with, I think is pretty solid for him, would be a Ryan Tannehill type guy. Ryan Tannehill was a former wide receiver. He made the transition into the NFL. He obviously wasn't able to carry your Miami Dolphins, Kyle, but you seen when he was able to have the right tools around him, he can be a pretty efficient quarterback. And then the way that the Titans use him and allow him to, put him in some run action from time to time, I think it'll be a great fit or a great comparison to compare him to Ryan Tannehill.
So nobody's.
When you talk about, sorry, Kyle, I was going to jump in real quick.
Go right ahead.
When you talk about the highest upside for all the quarterbacks, I have a lot of respect for Desmond Ridder, but to me, that's clearly Liberty's Malik Willis. Now the negative from Malik Willis are pretty bad. His play when he's becoming inaccurate, making bad decisions, it's terrible. I mean, he has three interception games already this season, but his highs and when he's clicking on all cylinders, I think to me he's the best quarterback in this class when it's all clicking. He's rocket arm, really fast, really powerful, has a really good contact balance as a runner. And so to me, if I'm a GM, I'm looking to get a guy in the building. Maybe he's not a finished product right now, but I can get my hands on him, try to develop him and see what he can turn into. That will be Malik Willis for me, just in terms of his overall physical attributes. I think the sky could be really high for him.
Which is interesting because Brentley, that's the exact same boat that I'm in, right? And that's why Malik for me is that's the guy I have as QB1, is because of the traits and the potential that he has. But the foil and the contrast there between a Malik Willis and who you and Dre have as QB1 in this most current update, who's Matt Corral, could not be more different when you think about stylistically and skills and traits. And Dre, I'd love to bring you into this conversation and then Brentley hear your thoughts about Corral as well. What is it about Corral? Because we're talking traits and Joe's on a traits guy and I'm on a traits guy. But then there's this Matt Corral dude who's a real gamer and he's slick and he's showing some toughness. So Dre, what have you seen from Corral that has you ready to buy in? And then Brentley, I'd ask you the same thing for that title of QB1.
Yeah, I want to start saying something first, about Malik. I think the thing is, he clearly has a strong arm. He can make plays both in and out of the pocket and so forth. My only issue with him is that as he's proven this year, he's been turnover prone, and a very important attribute for a quarterback is how he takes care of the football. He is a person who will touch the ball every play, and his turnovers scare me. And so that pair with he's not a huge player in terms of size, that's sort of the issue that I have with him. And then on the contrary, Matt has answered those questions in terms of turnovers for me this year. I think this past year he threw 14 picks, and he's taking a very good care of football this year. He has experience against the top competition, playing in the SEC. I think he's playing well. He's someone that can also extend plays, and it's shown that he has a strong enough form to be able to get the ball wherever he needs to. So I think that the person who has the least amount of questions for me at this stage is Matt Corral.
Yeah, Kyle, kind of what Joe said. It's hard to really go to bat for any of these guys as a surefire top QB1. I know in last month's TDN 100 reveal, I went to bat for Malik Willis, but that was three turnover games prior, and so it changes by week. But as I sit here today, my QB1 is Matt Corral. As Dre mentioned, I think there's the least amount of questions with him. He's really taking good care of the football, only 2 interceptions. And I just appreciate his skill set. He's not the biggest, not the most athletic, not the strongest arm, but what he has is the innate ability to escape pressure. He has outstanding instincts in the pocket, can make plays both in and out of structure, can deliver throws off platform in a variety of different angles. To me, he's just so creative with the ball in his hands. He's a natural playmaker that really, to me, it just reminds me of Joe Burrow at LSU. And I know Eric Galko kind of gave that comparison to Kenny Pickett, but I see it with Corral, just in terms of his instincts, his innate ability to feel pressure, evade pressure, keep his eyes on the field, deliver accurate strikes. I think he's just a playmaker. And so in a quarterback class that is kind of pick you're at an ice cream shop and you get your flavor, I'm going with Corral, who to me is not only probably the safest, but he also has a good amount of upside.
The only quarterback one we haven't had somebody go to bat for yet. Chrissy, we know Carson Strong, Kenny Pickett, very close for you. So since we've heard from the Corral QB1 gang and the Willis QB1 gang and the Ritter QB1 game and the Pickett QB1 gang, talk to us about Carson Strong. Give us this kind of elevator pitch on Carson and his play this season and what he's been able to do for Nevada.
Well, one thing I did want to say that I think is interesting is when you look at the FBS passing leaders for this season, you have Carson Strong at 4 and Kenny Pickett at 5, and it's 4 air raid quarterbacks, 1 pro style quarterback. And then when you look at the supporting cast of both quarterbacks, I think it's relatively weak. I think that Romeo Doubs is a very good wide receiver. I think Cole Turner is coming into his own, but I don't like what I see from the Nevada offensive line. Overall, I think the supporting cast is a little bit overrated. And I think that Strong has made the most that he can with a lower level supporting cast. And this is a quarterback that's not going to get a lot of attention just because he doesn't play in a big conference, but he's making the most of what he has. I don't think that he's at full capacity right now, but you look at what he did, almost leading Nevada to victory, keeping them in the game, putting them in the best possible position to win, whenever his plant leg is clearly at about 50%, about 350 yards that he managed to throw for. So I think that what he has, though, outside of just the mental processing, I think he's the best in this class. Instincts-wise, I think that he is the best in this class. And just basically what he's made within a small conference, and then the it factor. I think there's a lot of quarterbacks that are getting talked about as QB1 that don't have an it factor. I don't really think that Matt Corral has an it factor. And to me, what I look at that sets a lot of quarterbacks aside, this is something that Joe Burrow could do, something that Zach Wilson could do, is whenever my receiver does not have 7 steps on the defender down the sideline, can you deliver the ball accurately, on time, and into a seemingly impossibly tight window? And Carson Strong, not only can he do that, but he does it every single game, multiple times, regardless of the competition he's against, regardless of how much adversity he's facing, regardless of what capacity he's in, and regardless of how his supporting cast is performing. And so I think that this is a quarterback that has what it takes mentally, and he's a pure pocket passer. And to me, if a quarterback should first and foremost be 100% as a pure pocket passer, and that's where my issue lies with Malik Willis. I think he's a guy, super high ceiling, lots of traits, lots of stuff that he can do, but if he can't consistently take care of the football, you have absolutely nothing. You have an athlete.
I think for Carson, I think back to that Fresno State game too, with the 1 minute offense drill where he takes them the full length. They obviously don't win the football game because they don't get the 2-point conversion, but down 8, minute and change left, 90 yards to go, 3 money throws on that drive. So if you want the peaks of Carson Strong, that's a great place to go and start. But that is going to do it for this update of the TDN 100. We're doing one a month. We got another one coming in December. So make sure you keep an eye out for it. Like this video, hit subscribe to the YouTube channel so you know where to find it. And make sure you visit thedraftnetwork.com for all of your NFL, college football, and NFL draft needs. Kyle Krabs with the TDN staff. Thanks as always for watching, and we hope to see you again next time.